There's a moment in the Fellowship's journey I keep coming back to. Not the breaking at Amon Hen, not the battle that follows. Something quieter. Boromir sits beside the falls of Rauros, his great horn resting across his knees, watching the water cascade into mist below. His hands trace the silver patterns worked into the horn's surface, the same patterns his grandfather had touched, and his grandfather's grandfather before him. The weight of Gondor sits in those hands. And something else, too. Something that calls from the hobbit sitting 20 paces away, alone with his burden by the river's edge. What if Boromir had never tried to take the ring? Tonight, let's follow that thread. Let's ask what happens when a good man faces his darkest impulse and chooses, for once, to turn away. The mist from the falls settles on Boromir's face, like tears he cannot shed. 3 weeks since they left the golden woods of Lothlorien. 3 weeks of watching Frodo grow quieter and more distant, the weight of the ring pressing down on all of them, but heaviest on the one small hobbit who bears it. Boromir knows that weight. He carries his own version of it, the expectation of an entire city, an entire people, resting on his shoulders since the day he first took up sword and shield. But this is different. This pulls at him in ways his duty to Gondor never has, whispering promises that sound suspiciously like hope. With the ring, Gondor could stand forever. With the ring, his father's madness could be healed, his brother kept safe, his people freed from the endless siege that has defined their lives since before Boromir drew breath. The ring could give him strength enough to protect everyone he has ever loved. That's the thought that brings him to his feet, his horn sliding from his knees to hang at his side. That's what draws his steps toward where Frodo sits alone, staring into the churning water as if searching for answers in its depths. Boromir's boots crunch softly on the wet stones, but the hobbit doesn't turn. He knows who approaches. They all feel it when someone comes near the ring now. That subtle shift in the air, that thickening of possibility. You cannot sleep either, Boromir says, settling onto a boulder beside Frodo. It's not quite a question. None of them have slept well since leaving Galadriel's protection. The darkness feels heavier now, more present, as if Sauron's attention has turned toward them with renewed focus. Frodo's shoulders tense, but he doesn't look away from the water. The ring grows heavier, as does the choice before you. Boromir's voice carries the weight of his own struggle, though he doesn't yet recognize it. Where will you go from here, Frodo Baggins? East to the Black Gate? South through the marshes where the dead walk? Every path leads to darkness. That's why it must be me. Frodo's fingers move to the chain around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt but never forgotten. No one else should bear this burden. The words hit Boromir like a physical blow, not because they're wrong, but because they're so perfectly, devastatingly right. And in that rightness, he sees his own selfishness laid bare. Here is this small, brave creature, willing to walk into the very heart of evil for the sake of all Middle-earth, while Boromir thinks only of his own people, his own city, his own family's need. The ring calls to him then, stronger than it ever has. He can feel it through Frodo's clothes, warm and golden and full of possibility. His hand moves without conscious thought, reaching toward the hobbit's chest where the chain disappears beneath fabric. For just a moment, his fingertips brush the edge of hope. Then Boromir sees what he's doing. His hand stops, trembling in the air between them, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from the ring, but not quite touching. Frodo has gone completely still, his breathing shallow, every muscle in his small body tensed for flight or fight. The mist from the falls continues to swirl around them, but the world has narrowed to this moment, this choice, this single movement that will determine everything that follows. Boromir's hand closes into a fist. He pulls it back, pressing it against his chest as if the contact burns. "Forgive me," he whispers, and the words come from deeper than his throat, from some place in his soul that has been waiting his whole life to speak this truth. "I am not as strong as I pretended to be." Frodo turns to look at him then, really look at him, and what he sees in the hobbit's eyes is not fear or anger, but something far more devastating. Understanding, compassion, the same mercy that led him to spare Gollum's life in the mines, the same grace that carried him this far when any reasonable person would have given up long ago. "None of us are," Frodo says quietly. "That's why we travel together. That's why we share the burden, even when we cannot share the ring itself. You would forgive me? Even knowing how close I came to—" Boromir cannot finish the sentence. Some failures are too large for words. "You stopped yourself." Frodo's voice carries a wonder that makes Boromir's chest tighten. "When the moment came, when you could have taken it, you stopped. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many would have chosen differently?" Boromir doesn't know. He only knows that sitting here beside this brave, small person, the whispers of the ring seem quieter than they have in weeks. Not gone, never gone as long as he remains in its presence, but manageable in a way they weren't before he spoke his weakness aloud. They sit together in silence for a long time, watching the water fall and listening to the distant voices of their companions beginning to stir with the approaching dawn. When they finally rise to return to camp, they move together, neither leading nor following, but walking side by side as equals who have seen each other clearly and chosen not to look away. Aragorn is tending the fire when they approach, adding small branches to coax the flames higher. His eyes meet Boromir's across the glowing embers, and in that gaze, the son of Gondor sees recognition of some fundamental change. Aragorn says nothing, asks no questions, but something in the way he nods suggests he understands that the fellowship that broke its fast this morning will be subtly different from the one that made camp the night before. The ring still hangs around Frodo's neck, still calls to anyone brave or foolish enough to get close to it. But for the first time since they left Rivendell, Boromir feels like he might be strong enough to answer that call with silence. Not because the temptation has lessened, but because he has learned that strength sometimes looks like stopping your hand before it reaches too far, like speaking your weakness before it can become someone else's burden. His horn weighs heavy at his side, silver catching the first light of dawn. Soon they will break camp and continue toward whatever fate awaits them in the lands beyond. But for now, for these few precious moments before the day begins and choices multiply, the fellowship remains whole. And perhaps that wholeness will prove to be the difference between salvation and disaster, between the darkness falling and the light enduring just a little bit longer. That's what we're here to find out. The sound comes first, before the sight of them, a distant crashing through underbrush, too heavy for deer, too organized for wolves. Aragorn's head lifts from where he crouches beside the dying embers of their breakfast fire, his ranger's instincts reading the forest in ways the others are still learning to trust. But this morning, they don't need his interpretation. Even the hobbits can hear the purposeful rhythm of many feet moving in coordination, the metallic scrape of armor against branch and stone. Boromir's hand finds his horn before his conscious mind registers the threat. 3 hours since dawn, 3 hours since he and Frodo returned from the river, with something changed between them, something settled. Now that fragile peace splinters against the reality of pursuit. The Uruk-hai have found them. In the original timeline, the one we know, this moment fractures everything. Frodo vanishes with the ring, the Fellowship scatters in confusion and terror, and Boromir dies alone on a hill of arrows while trying to protect 2 hobbits who shouldn't have been vulnerable in the first place. But that timeline depends on choices already changed, paths already redirected. This morning, the Fellowship faces the enemy as they were always meant to. Together. "How many?" Legolas asks, his elven ears parsing the approaching sounds with surgical precision. He stands in one fluid motion, bow already in hand, arrow nocked but not yet drawn. There's no panic in the movement, just the efficient transition from rest to readiness that marks a warrior with centuries of experience. "Too many," Aragorn answers, but his voice carries grim determination rather than despair. 40, perhaps 50. Saruman's hunters. He turns to the group, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "They've tracked us since the river. We cannot outrun them, not with the hobbits." Gimli spits into the dying fire, raising a brief hiss of steam. "Then we don't run." His axe comes off his back with practiced ease, the blade catching what little sunlight filters through the canopy. "Let them come. They'll find the dwarves don't break as easily as they might hope." But it's Boromir who steps forward, his horn now hanging ready at his side, his hand steady on his sword hilt. In another timeline, he would be racing through the woods alone right now, desperate to reach Merry and Pippin before the enemy could claim them. Here he stands with his companions and feels something he hasn't experienced since his youth, the certainty of shared purpose. "We make our stand where the ground favors us," he says, his tactical mind already working through the terrain they passed in their morning's walk. The clearing ahead, where the old stone seat overlooks the slope. High ground, clear lines of sight, nowhere for them to approach unseen. Aragorn nods, recognizing the wisdom in Boromir's assessment. Amon Hen, the hill of sight. There's something fitting about making their stand there, on that ancient watchtower where the kings of old once looked out over their lands. "We can see them coming from every direction." Frodo's face has gone pale, but his jaw sets with quiet resolve. "The ring will call to them. They'll come for me first." "Let them try," Sam says fiercely, his own sword appearing in his hand with surprising speed. It's a simple blade, nothing like the elvish weapons the others carry, but the determination in his grip makes it seem no less deadly. "They'll have to go through all of us." Merry and Pippin exchange glances, their usual cheerful banter replaced by grim understanding. They're the youngest, the least experienced in battle, but they've seen enough darkness in recent months to know what's at stake. Pippin's hand tightens around his small sword, while Merry hefts his, as if remembering the weight of it. They move quickly, but without panic, gathering their scattered belongings and extinguishing the last traces of their fire. Boromir takes point with Aragorn, leading them toward the hill, while Legolas brings up the rear, his bow ready to discourage any pursuit that gets too close. The hobbits stay in the center of their formation, protected on all sides by those who have sworn to defend them. The stone seat of Amon Hen rises before them like a promise of sanctuary, though they all know it will be anything but. The circular platform offers commanding views in every direction, but it also leaves them exposed once the battle begins. There will be no retreat from here, no second chances. They will stand together or fall together. Boromir's horn fiddles heavier at his side as they climb the ancient steps. In the timeline we know, he sounds it as a desperate call for aid that comes too late. Here, it waits to serve a different purpose. Not a cry for rescue, but a rallying call for warriors who fight as one. The Uruk-hai break from the tree line below like a dark tide, their black armor glinting wickedly in the dappled sunlight. Ugly creatures, bred for war and nothing else, their voices raised in harsh battle cries that echo off the surrounding hills. They carry crude but effective weapons, and their numbers are everything Aragorn feared and more. But they're not facing a scattered fellowship this time. They're not hunting frightened hobbits through the underbrush while the ring-bearer flees alone with his burden. They're climbing toward a coordinated defense, toward warriors who have had time to prepare, toward a unity that Saruman's calculations never accounted for. "Remember," Boromir calls to his companions as the enemy closes the distance. "We hold the high ground. Make them pay for every step." His voice carries the authority of countless battles, of years spent defending Osgiliath against impossible odds. This is what he was born for, standing between darkness and those he has sworn to protect. Legolas draws his bow with practiced grace, his first arrow taking the lead Uruk through the throat before the creature can take 5 steps up the hill. The elf's face remains serene, almost meditative, as he nocks a second arrow and finds his next target. Each shot is deliberate, efficient, devastating. Gimli roars his war cry and charges down to meet the first wave, his axe cleaving through Uruk armor like parchment. He fights with the fury of his fathers, every stroke a masterpiece of dwarven battlecraft, every parry a lesson in how to turn an enemy's strength against them. Aragorn moves like water around stone, his sword flickering in and out of Uruk-gard, finding gaps in armor and weakness in stance with the deadly precision of a ranger who has fought these creatures before. He stays close to the hobbits, his blade clearing space around them as they struggle to keep up with the brutal pace of real combat. And Boromir stands at the center of it all, his horn finally sounding across the battlefield. Not a call for rescue this time, but a declaration of defiance. The deep bronze voice of Gondor's might rolling across the hills, telling everyone within miles that here stands the Fellowship of the Ring, and here they make their stand against the darkness. The sound gives strength to his companions and strikes uncertainty into their enemies. Some of the Uruk-hai hesitate, recognizing the horn of Gondor from stories told around their war fires. In that moment of hesitation, the Fellowship presses their advantage. Merry and Pippin fight back to back, their smaller size allowing them to duck under Uruk swings and strike at unprotected legs and flanks. They're not mighty warriors, but they're brave beyond their years, and clever enough to use every advantage the terrain provides. Sam stands over Frodo like a guardian angel, his simple sword blocking strikes that would overwhelm the ring-bearer. He fights with the desperate strength of someone protecting the most important thing in his world, and that strength proves more than sufficient against creatures who understand only brutality. Frodo himself moves like shadow, the ring making him harder to target, harder to pin down. He doesn't seek combat, but when it finds him, his elven blade bites deep into Uruk flesh. The battle that follows is brutal, but brief. The Uruk-hai expected to find scattered prey, easy pickings fleeing in terror through the forest. Instead, they face a coordinated defense that cuts through their ranks with methodical precision. The Fellowship's victory comes not through individual heroics, but through unity, through the simple but devastating effectiveness of warriors who trust each other completely. When the last Uruk falls, the silence that follows feels almost sacred. They have faced their first true test as an intact fellowship and emerged victorious. Not unscathed All of them bear cuts and bruises, and Boromir's shoulder bleeds from a near miss that tore through mail and cloth, but whole. Boromir slides his horn back to his side, its voice still echoing faintly off the distant hills. In another timeline, that horn's last song was a dirge. Here, it sings of triumph and unity maintained. But victory comes with its own weight of knowledge. The enemy has found them, marked them, tested them. More will come, and the next attack will be prepared for what the Uruk-hai learned here before they died. The Fellowship may have won this battle, but the war has only just begun. And that's what makes this moment so precious, so worth holding on to. For these few minutes, standing among their fallen enemies with the sun breaking through the clouds above Amon Hen, they are exactly what they were meant to be. 9 companions bound by oath and purpose, strong enough together to face whatever darkness awaits them. That strength is about to be tested in ways none of them can imagine. The silence after battle has its own particular weight, not the peaceful quiet of morning or evening, but something heavier, loaded with the knowledge of what has just passed and what must come next. Boromir sits on the ancient stone seat of Amon Hen, his sword laid across his knees, watching the rest of the Fellowship tend to wounds and gather scattered gear. His shoulder throbs where the Uruk blade found the gap in his mail, but he's alive to feel it. That simple fact carries more significance than he's quite ready to acknowledge. In the timeline we know, Boromir's blood would be soaking into the earth at the base of this hill by now. Instead, he breathes in the cool afternoon air and considers the strange turns that have brought him to this moment. Wounded but whole, defeated but victorious, facing choices instead of endings. The victory feels incomplete, though, wrong somehow, in a way that has nothing to do with their tactical success, and everything to do with the larger game being played around them. They've revealed themselves here, announced their presence to every scout and spy within 50 miles. Saruman knows where they are now, knows they're still together, knows the ring hasn't vanished into the anonymity of 2 hobbits traveling alone through the wilderness. "We cannot stay here," Aragorn says, giving voice to the thoughts they've all been avoiding. He kneels beside a dead Uruk, examining the creature's armor and weapons with the careful attention of someone reading an enemy's capabilities. "This was a scouting force. The main army will follow." Legolas nods from where he recovers his arrows, testing each shaft for damage before returning it to his quiver. Their armor bears the mark of Isengard, but also of Barad-dûr. Saruman and Sauron hunt us together now. We have shown them we are still united. The word hangs in the air between them, pregnant with implications none of them want to examine too closely. United. It should feel like strength, and in many ways it does. But unity also means visibility, means presenting a target large enough for the Dark Lord's attention to fix upon. A single hobbit with a ring might slip through the cracks of Sauron's awareness. 9 companions traveling together cannot. Sam tends to a cut on Pippin's arm with the gentle efficiency of someone who has bandaged many small hurts over the years. His hands are steady, but his eyes keep drifting toward Frodo, who stands apart from the group, staring out over the forest canopy toward the eastern horizon, where Mordor lies, hidden beyond the curve of the world. Frodo feels their eyes on him, feels the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. The ring hangs heavy around his neck, heavier than it was this morning, as if their victory here has somehow added to its burden rather than lessened it. Perhaps it has. Perhaps every moment it remains with the Fellowship, every person it touches with its influence, makes the final task harder, rather than easier. I should go alone, he says quietly, not turning from his contemplation of the distant mountains. We proved today that together we can fight. But fighting isn't the mission. The mission is to reach Mount Doom without being caught, and 9 people cannot hide where one might pass unnoticed. No. The word comes from Boromir with such firm conviction that it startles them all, including himself. He rises from the stone seat, his wounded shoulder protesting the movement, and walks to stand beside Frodo. That path leads only to your death. I've seen what this thing does to those who carry it alone for too long. I won't be party to your murder. Gimli grunts his agreement, his axe now clean and resting across his broad shoulders. The lad's right. Begging your pardon, Master Frodo, but you're not built for travelling alone through hostile territory. None of us are, come to that. We're stronger together. Stronger, yes, Aragorn says slowly, working through the tactical implications as he speaks. But also more visible. Every orc in Middle-earth will be looking for 9 travellers now. They'll know our faces, our weapons, our patterns of movement. Merry looks up from where he's been cleaning Uruk blood from his sword blade. So what do we do? Split up? Some of us go one way and some another? The question crystallizes the choice that's been building since the last Uruk fell. They cannot continue as they have, not now that Saruman knows their strength and disposition. But neither can they simply scatter to the winds and hope for the best. They need a strategy that accounts for both the mission's requirements and the changed circumstances their victory has created. Boromir's hand finds his horn again, the familiar weight of it grounding him as his mind works through possibilities. There is another way, he says finally. We divide, but strategically, with purpose. Aragorn's eyes sharpen with interest. Speak your mind. The ring must reach Mordor, but it need not go alone. Boromir's voice carries the authority of someone who has planned many campaigns, considered many variables. 2 or 3 of us escort Frodo and Sam toward the Black Gate. The rest travel openly, drawing pursuit away from the true mission. A decoy, Legolas says, understanding immediately. The enemy expects us to travel together. If some of us continue as before, making no attempt to hide, their attention follows us rather than searching for smaller parties. Pippin frowns, working through the implications. But who goes where? And what happens to whoever plays the decoy? They'd be walking into certain death. Not death, Aragorn says slowly, his mind already tracing the paths this strategy might take. War. The decoy doesn't flee. It goes where it was always meant to go. To Minas Tirith, to Rohan, to the gathering of the armies of the West. If we cannot hide from Sauron's attention, then we use it to serve our purposes rather than his. The plan begins to take shape in the space between them, built from tactical necessity and desperate hope in equal measure. The Fellowship would split, but not from failure or catastrophe. From choice. From strategy. I will go with Frodo, Boromir says. And there's something final in his voice, something that brooks no argument. I know the roads to Mordor, and I know how to move unseen when necessary. My presence might slow you down, but it will keep the ring-bearer alive long enough to complete his task. And I go with them, Sam says immediately, as if any other arrangement were unthinkable. Mr. Frodo's not going anywhere without Sam Gamgee, strategy or no strategy. Frodo opens his mouth to protest, to insist that his burden is his alone, but Boromir's hand falls on his shoulder with gentle firmness. We've been through this already, my friend. Some burdens are too heavy for one person to bear. Let us help you carry this one. Aragorn nods, accepting the inevitable. Then Legolas, Gimli and I will take the hobbits to Edoras. Theoden will need to know what comes, and Rohan will need every sword it can muster. Our open journey will draw the pursuit away from you. And what of us? Merry asks, his young face serious, in a way that would have been impossible before the dark months of their journey began. Pippin and I mean. Where do we fit in this plan? You come with me, Aragorn says firmly. Rohan will need to know what the hobbits of the Shire are capable of. Your courage at Amon Hen proved that the small folk of Middle-earth will stand against the darkness. That knowledge will give heart to those who must fight in the battles to come. The decision settles over them like the weight of fate itself. They will part ways here, on this hill where they stood together against the enemy for the first time since leaving Rivendell. Some will go east toward shadow and fire, others north toward war and uncertain alliance. All of them into danger, but danger of different kinds, for different purposes. Boromir's horn remains silent at his side now, its voice no longer needed to rally defenders or call for aid. Instead, it will travel quietly through hostile lands, its song saved for the moment when it might serve the greater good one final time. The thought brings him a strange kind of peace. He has spent his entire adult life preparing to give everything for his people, for his city, for the cause of light in a darkening world. Now he finally knows what form that sacrifice will take. The sun begins its descent toward the western hills, painting the battlefield around them in shades of gold and red. Soon they will gather their scattered belongings and begin their separate journeys into whatever fate awaits. But for now, for these last few moments, they remain what they have always been. 9 companions bound by oath and friendship, strong enough together to face the approaching darkness. That strength will have to sustain them through whatever comes next, because after today, they will be testing it separately, in places where the bonds between them can only be felt rather than seen, remembered rather than renewed. The Fellowship is about to discover whether love and loyalty can survive division, whether the unity they forged in fire can endure when stretched across the width of Middle-earth itself. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight, they will make camp together one last time, and the sound of Boromir's breathing will remind them all that sometimes the greatest victories come not from dying well, but from choosing, in the crucial moment, to live for something larger than yourself. The difference that choice makes is what we're here to explore. 3 days east of Amon Hen, the landscape begins to betray them. What started as rolling hills dotted with ancient oak and ash gives way to broken stone and treacherous ravines, the kind of country that seems designed to twist ankles and confound sense of direction. The Emyn Muil stretches before them like a maze carved from grey rock and bitter wind, and somewhere in its heart waits the path that will take them to the very gates of Mordor. Boromir watches Frodo stumble over another loose stone and feels the familiar tug of conflicted duty. 3 days of walking beside the ring-bearer, 3 days of constant proximity to the thing that whispers promises in the back of his mind like a persistent fever dream. The temptation hasn't lessened since that morning by the falls of Rauros. If anything, it has grown more sophisticated, more personal, more attuned to the specific fears and hopes that drive a man like Boromir of Gondor. With the ring, your father would never again look at you with disappointment. With the ring, Faramir would be safe from every arrow, every blade. With the ring, the white tower of Minas Tirith would stand forever, inviolate against the darkness. The thoughts come unbidden as he helps Sam navigate a particularly treacherous stretch of scree, his soldier's instincts reading the terrain for the safest path, while his mind wrestles with possibilities that grow more seductive with each passing hour. But he has learned to recognize the ring's voice now, learned to separate its honeyed promises from his own genuine concerns for his city and his family. This is what courage looks like, he is beginning to understand. Not the absence of temptation, but the daily choice to resist it. Not a single moment of heroic refusal, but the patient work of saying no, hour after hour, day after day, until saying no becomes as natural as breathing. "Tell me about the White City," Frodo says during one of their brief rests, settling onto a boulder with the careful movements of someone whose feet have developed more blisters than calluses. "You speak of it often, but always as if we should already know what makes it special." Boromir finds himself grateful for the question, for the chance to speak of something pure and beautiful rather than the weight of burden and duty that has dominated their conversation since leaving the Hill of Sight. Minas Tirith is... He pauses, searching for words adequate to the memory of sunrise over the 7 levels, of the white stone gleaming like hope made visible. Imagine 7 rings of white stone rising from the plain, like a great ship's prow pointed at the morning, each level larger and grander than the one below, until you reach the citadel at the crown, where the white tree grows, in the court of the fountain. Sam looks up from where he's been examining a cut on his palm, caught, despite his careful attention, to handholds. Sounds grand, like something out of the old stories. The old stories were written there, Boromir says with quiet pride, in the houses of healing, where the lore masters preserve everything worth remembering, in the great library beneath the citadel, where scrolls older than the kingdoms of men still wait for those wise enough to read them. His voice grows softer, more personal. I learned to read in those halls, learned my letters from texts that spoke of kings and heroes I thought I would never equal. Frodo studies Boromir's face, with the particular attention hobbits bring to understanding the people they choose to trust. "And do you still believe that? That you'll never equal them?" The question hits closer to the bone than Frodo probably intended. Boromir considers it as they resume walking, picking their way between stones that seem placed by malicious design to catch unwary feet. Does he believe himself unequal to the heroes of old? A week ago, he would have answered yes without hesitation. The shame of his attempted betrayal, the knowledge of his weakness, would have made any other answer impossible. But something has changed in the quiet hours of this journey. Something in the way Frodo looks at him, not with the wariness of someone expecting betrayal, but with the steady trust of someone who has seen him at his worst and chosen to believe in his capacity for better. Something in the way Sam includes him in the small domestic rituals that mark their travel, the evening division of food, the morning inspection of gear, the 100 tiny courtesies that transform 3 strangers into companions. "I think," Boromir says finally, "that the heroes of old were probably more like us than the stories suggest, frightened, uncertain, making choices they hoped were right without ever really knowing if they were enough." "Now that sounds more honest," Sam says with approval. "Never met a hero who didn't have mud on his boots and doubts in his heart when you get right down to it." They're laughing, quietly, carefully, but genuinely, when the voice comes from the rocks above them. Thin, wheedling, familiar in a way that makes Boromir's hand move instinctively to his sword hilt. "What's it got in its pockets? What's it carrying, precious?" Gollum crouches on a limestone ledge 20 feet above their heads, his pale skin almost translucent in the weak afternoon light. He moves with the fluid, unnatural grace of something that has spent too long in dark places, his bulbous eyes fixed on Frodo with an intensity that makes Boromir's stomach turn. We knows it, precious. We remembers the taste of it. The nasty little hobbit took our birthday present. Yes, it did. Get down, Boromir barks, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Show yourself properly, or face the consequences. Gollum hisses but doesn't move, his attention still locked on the hobbit, who bears the thing he has sought for decades. We don't listen to the tall men. No, precious. We only want what was stolen from us. Give it back, nasty hobbit. Give us our precious back. Boromir's sword slides from its sheath with the whisper of steel on leather. 3 days of constant vigilance, 3 days of watching the rocks for signs of pursuit, and this creature has been following them all along, close enough to strike, close enough to steal the ring if they'd been careless even once. The failure of awareness burns in his chest like a physical wound. I know what you are, he says, his blade catching the light as he turns to face the ledge where Gollum crouches. I know the stories they tell in Gondor of the creature that haunts the misty mountains. Come down and meet an honest death, or I'll climb up there and give you a dishonest one. Boromir, no! Frodo's voice cuts through the tension with surprising firmness. Don't kill him. Don't! Boromir stares at the hobbit, as if he's suggested they invite Sauron himself to share their evening meal. Frodo, that thing wants to murder you for the ring. It's been following us for days, waiting for its chance. Why would you show it mercy? Because mercy is what separates us from the darkness we're fighting. Frodo steps forward, his small hand resting on Boromir's sword arm with gentle insistence. And because I think he might be able to help us. The idea is so preposterous that Boromir almost laughs. Help them? This pale, twisted creature that speaks of murder and theft with the casual tone most people reserve for discussing the weather? But something in Frodo's expression stops him, some quality of certainty that suggests the hobbit sees possibilities that escape his companion's more straightforward military thinking. We knows the way, Gollum says suddenly, his voice taking on a wheedling, almost pleading quality. We knows the secret paths, the hidden roads, the tall men with their armies and their horns. They makes too much noise, yes, precious, but we can show the way that is dark and quiet and safe. Safe for whom? Boromir demands, but Frodo raises his hand for silence. You know the way to Mordor, the way to Mount Doom. Gollum's head bobs frantically. Yes, we knows it well. Through the marshes where the dead men lie, through the black gate, through the tunnels where the shadows wait. We knows all the ways, all the secret places. We can guide, yes, precious. We can help the nice hobbit find what he seeks. Boromir wants to grab Frodo by the shoulders and shake sense into him. This is obviously a trap, obviously a deception designed to lead them into ambush or betrayal. No creature that speaks with such obvious madness can be trusted with something as precious as their lives, let alone their mission. But when Frodo looks up at him, Boromir sees something in the hobbit's eyes that gives him pause. Not naivety. Frodo knows exactly what kind of creature Gollum is. But there's a calculation there, a weighing of risks and possibilities that suggests the ring-bearer understands something about their situation that his protector has missed. We need a guide, Frodo says quietly. The lands ahead are unknown to us, and we cannot afford to wander lost while Sauron's forces scour Middle-earth for the ring. This creature knows the paths we need to walk. And you trust him, not to lead us straight into an orc patrol the moment it's convenient. I trust him to want the ring, Frodo says, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an obvious truth, and I trust that wanting to mean he needs me alive until we reach Mount Doom. It's a cold calculation, pragmatic in a way that would do credit to any military commander, but it also requires a level of faith in the essential selfishness of evil that makes Boromir's soldier's soul recoil. To deliberately place their lives in the hands of someone who wishes them harm, betting that his malice will serve their purposes better than honest alliance. It feels like the kind of gamble that ends with good men dead and missions failed. But looking up at the creature crouched on the rocks above them, Boromir has to admit the truth of Frodo's assessment. Gollum wants the ring more than anything else in Middle-earth. That want has sustained him through centuries of exile and madness, driven him from the depths of the misty mountains to the borders of Mordor in pursuit of his precious. If anyone knows the secret ways to Mount Doom, it would be someone willing to follow the ring anywhere it might lead. "Swear it," Frodo calls up to Gollum, his voice carrying surprising authority for someone so small. "Swear on the ring that you will guide us true, that you will lead us by the safest path to the fires where it was made." The change in Gollum is immediate and terrible. His whole body convulses, as if he's been struck by lightning, and when he speaks again, his voice carries a pain so profound it borders on the sacred. "We swears on the precious. We swears to guide the nice hobbit, to show the safe paths, to keep the promises. Yes, precious, we swears it." Sam spits into the dust at their feet. "Don't like it, Mr. Frodo. Don't like the look of him. Don't like the sound of him. And I especially don't like the idea of following him into places where honest folk fear to tread." "I don't like it either," Frodo admits. "But liking and necessity aren't always the same thing." Boromir slides his sword back into its sheath with reluctant acceptance. The decision is made, rightly or wrongly. They will trust their lives to a creature that covets the very thing they seek to destroy, and hope that his greed serves their purpose better than their own ignorance of the roads ahead. But he will watch every step of the journey, every choice of path, every moment when Gollum's attention strays toward the ring-bearer. Boromir will be ready. The creature may know the secret ways to Mordor, but Boromir knows something more valuable: the precise angle and force required to separate a head from its shoulders, should the need arise. Some mercies, he has learned, can only be sustained by the willingness to set limits on how far they extend. As Gollum scrambles down from his ledge to join their small company, Boromir touches his horn with one finger and takes comfort in its familiar weight. The road ahead may be dark and uncertain, but he no longer travels it burdened by the weight of his own failures. Whatever comes next, he will meet it as he met the choice at Amon Hen, with eyes open and conscience clear, ready to pay whatever price duty demands. That readiness, he is beginning to understand, may be the only form of heroism that actually matters. The smell reaches them first, before the sight of standing water or the sound of things moving in places where nothing should live. It's a smell that catches in the back of the throat and refuses to leave. Old death mixed with stagnant water. The particular rot that comes from things that should have decayed long ago but somehow persist. Boromir knows that smell. He's breathed it on battlefields where the dead lie too thick to bury properly, where the urgent needs of the living must take precedence over respect for those who can no longer be helped. But this is different. This smell has weight to it, history, the accumulated grief of centuries pressed into mud and marsh gas. The dead marshes stretch before them like a wound in the earth that has never properly healed, and somewhere in their depths wait the faces of men who fell when the world was younger, and hope seemed less fragile than it does now. There must be another way, Boromir says, studying the treacherous landscape with the practiced eye of someone who has spent his adult life reading terrain for advantage and weakness. No army in their right mind would march through swampland when drier ground lies within reach. There will be roads, old ones perhaps, but roads nonetheless. Gollum hisses his disagreement, crouched on a limestone outcrop like some pale, malevolent bird. No, the tall man doesn't understand. The roads are watched. Precious. The Black Riders know the roads. The orcs know the roads. Only in the marshes are we safe from their eyes. Safe from their eyes, perhaps, but not safe from their blades. Boromir points to the southeast, where the ground rises into a series of low ridges that would provide both concealment and faster travel. Those hills would take us around the worst of the marsh while keeping us on solid footing, a forced march of 2 days instead of a week of picking our way through bog and quicksand. The debate that follows has become familiar over the past few days of travel. Gollum, with his centuries of skulking and hiding, advocates for the most circuitous and concealed routes possible. Boromir, with his soldier's instincts, pushes for speed and directness, even when it means accepting calculated risks, and Frodo, caught between them, must weigh the wisdom of concealment against the danger of delay. What kind of watchers would we face on these roads? Frodo asks, his practical hobbit mind cutting through the theoretical to focus on what actually matters. Southron patrols, most likely, Boromir admits. Sauron has extended his reach through the southern lands, and his allies scout far from their home territories. But patrols can be avoided, or if necessary, dealt with. The dead. He gestures toward the marshes. The dead present problems that cannot be solved with sword and strategy. Sam shivers despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. Don't much fancy either option, if I'm being honest. Fighting the living sounds bad enough without having to worry about what might be lurking under all that dark water. But the choice is made for them before they can settle on a strategy. The sound of horses moving at speed drifts up from the southern approach, accompanied by the harsh voices of riders who make no attempt at concealment. A Southron patrol, riding hard along the very road Boromir had suggested they take. "Down!" he hisses, pulling Frodo and Sam behind the rocks where Gollum already crouches. "Let them pass, then we'll see what we're dealing with." The riders that emerge from the broken ground are everything Boromir expected. And worse. 12 men, mounted on horses, bred for war, their armor bearing the insignia of Harad and their weapons the distinctive curve of southern smiths. But what makes his blood run cold is the banner they carry. Not just the crimson and gold of the Southron kingdoms, but the lidless eye of Barad-dûr worked in silver thread. These are not mere scouts or raiders. These are Sauron's own, riding under his direct authority. "They're ranging too far north," Boromir murmurs, watching the patrol pause at the very crossroads he had planned to use. "The Dark Lord extends his reach faster than we anticipated." "Nasty men on nasty horses," Gollum whispers, his bulbous eyes fixed on the riders with predatory attention. "They hunts for us. Yes, precious. They hunts for the ring. We must go where they cannot follow. Into the marshes, in other words. Into the realm of the dead, where even Sauron's servants fear to venture." Boromir watches the Southrons make camp at the crossroads, effectively blocking any attempt to use the road he had favored, and accepts the inevitable with the grim practicality of a soldier who knows when he's been outmaneuvered. "Very well," he says quietly. "The marshes it is. But we go carefully, and we go together. No one strays from the group, No one touches anything without permission, and no one looks too long at whatever we might see in the water. Gollum's face splits in what might charitably be called a smile. Yes, the tall man learns wisdom. We lead safe, we leads true, through the dead places where even the Black Riders fears to go. The first step into the marsh is like crossing a threshold into another world. The solid ground gives way to something that might be earth, or might be the accumulated debris of ages, held together by water that looks like strong tea and smells like an opened grave. Strange lights flicker in the distance, cold and blue and deeply wrong, while sounds that might be voices carry on the wind from directions that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. Boromir's military training serves him poorly here. This is not terrain to be conquered or held, not an enemy to be outflanked or broken. This is something older and more patient than war, something that has been waiting in the dark water and twisted reed for longer than kingdoms have risen and fallen. All his knowledge of tactics and strategy reduces to a simple imperative. Follow Gollum, step only where he steps, and try not to think too hard about what lies beneath the surface. They have been walking for perhaps an hour when Frodo stumbles, catching himself on a reed that bends alarmingly under his weight. As he regains his balance, he looks down into the dark water beside the narrow path, and goes very still. "There are faces," he says quietly, "in the water. They look almost alive." "Don't look," Gollum hisses urgently. "Don't look, don't listen, don't touch. The dead keep their own counsel, yes, precious. They speaks to those who stares too long, calls to those who listens too close." But Boromir has already looked, drawn by the same fascination that grips all living things when confronted with their own mortality. And what he sees in the water makes his breath catch in his throat. Faces, yes, but not the anonymous dead of ancient battlefields. Specific faces, individual men whose expressions remain clear despite the centuries they have spent beneath the water. Warriors in the armor of Gondor, their white tree still visible on surcoat and shield. Elven lords with the high cheekbones and pointed ears that mark the firstborn, their weapons still clutched in hands that will never again know warmth. And there, almost close enough to touch, a man whose face bears the unmistakable stamp of the House of Denethor. "My ancestor," Boromir whispers, understanding flooding through him like cold water. Those are the dead of the last alliance, the final battle against Sauron when Gil-galad and Elendil fell. The face in the water might belong to his great-great-grandfather or some cousin whose name has been lost to the turning of the years, but the resemblance is unmistakable, the same strong jaw and deep-set eyes that look back at Boromir from his own mirror. This man fought and died on this very ground, fell defending the same cause that now brings his descendant through the marshes toward the same enemy. "Come away," Sam says urgently, tugging at Boromir's sleeve. "Mr. Frodo's right. They do look alive, like they might sit up and start talking at any moment." But Boromir cannot look away. In that face beneath the water, he sees not just family resemblance, but something like accusation. What right does he have to the name of Gondor, when he nearly betrayed everything these men died to protect? What claim can he make to their legacy, when he came so close to choosing power over duty? "They died fighting the same darkness we fight now," Frodo says softly, understanding perhaps better than anyone what Boromir sees in the water. Their sacrifice wasn't meaningless, because we still struggle against what they opposed. It gains meaning from the fact that we continue their work. The words hit Boromir like a physical blow, not because they wound, but because they heal something in him that he didn't know was broken. The dead man in the water didn't fall so that the fight would be finished forever. He fell so that when the darkness rose again, his heirs would be ready to take up the battle in their turn. Yes, he says quietly, finally turning away from the water and the faces that shimmer just beneath its surface. Yes, you're right. They fought so that we could fight. They died so that we could choose, in our own time, what prices we're willing to pay for the light. Gollum watches this exchange with the calculating attention of someone who understands very little about honor or legacy, but everything about the way grief can be turned into either strength or weakness. When Boromir straightens and nods for them to continue, the creature's respect for their little company increases perceptibly. The tall man learns quickly, he murmurs as they resume their careful progress through the marsh. The dead teaches those with eyes to see, yes, precious. They shows what was, what is, what might be. The rest of their journey through the dead marshes passes in contemplative silence, each of them lost in thoughts, too complex for words. Boromir finds himself walking differently, not with the careful precision of someone avoiding danger, but with the measured pace of someone following in the footsteps of ancestors. The ground beneath his feet has been consecrated by the blood of heroes, and he will not dishonor their sacrifice by approaching his own trials with anything less than the courage they showed in theirs. When they finally emerge from the marshes onto solid ground, the sun is setting behind them, and the black walls of the Morannon rise in the distance like a promise of horrors yet to come. But Boromir's hand finds his horn with steady fingers, and for the first time since leaving Amon Hen, the weight of it feels right against his hip. He is the heir of men who faced impossible odds and fought anyway. The blood of heroes runs in his veins, and their example lights the path ahead. Whatever comes next, he will meet it as they would have met it, with blade ready and heart open to whatever sacrifice the moment demands. The dead have taught him that much, at least. Sometimes the greatest gift one generation can give the next is the knowledge that courage is possible, that ordinary men can become heroes when the need is great enough. That knowledge, Boromir is beginning to understand, may be the only inheritance that really matters. The black gate of Mordor rises before them like the materialization of every nightmare that has ever troubled the sleep of free peoples. Two towers of iron and stone, each tall enough to scrape the belly of the clouds, connected by a wall that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Morannon stands as more than mere fortification. It is architecture, as intimidation, engineering as declaration of war against hope itself. Boromir crouches behind the rocky outcrop that has served as their observation post for the better part of an hour, his trained eye cataloguing defensive positions with the methodical precision of someone who has spent his life thinking about how to break sieges and how to withstand them. What he sees makes his soldier's heart sink, even as his strategic mind begins working through possibilities that his companions cannot yet imagine. 40,000 orcs, at minimum, he murmurs, his voice barely above a whisper. Probably closer to 60 when you account for the reserves they'll have stationed inside the gate complex itself. Siege weapons on the towers, cavalry in the courtyards, and enough crossbow positions to turn any assault into a massacre before it covers half the distance to the walls. Frodo shifts beside him, his hobbit's eyes struggling to pass the military significance of what they observe. Then we cannot go through. Not the way armies go through, no. Boromir continues his assessment, noting the patrol patterns, the blind spots, the places where an ambitious climber might find purchase on what appears to be sheer stone. But armies aren't trying to slip two hobbits and their guardians past a guard post. The question isn't whether we can break the gate. The question is whether we can avoid having to try. Gollum whimpers from his position, wedged between two boulders, his pale form nearly invisible in the shadows. Nasty Blackgate, yes. Precious. Too many eyes, too many swords. We cannot go this way, mustn't try this way. We knows another path, secret and safe. Secret paths have their own dangers, Boromir replies, his tone carrying the weight of someone who has learned to distrust any plan that sounds too convenient, and safe is a relative term when we're discussing routes known to creatures like you. The exchange that follows has become the pattern of their decision-making over the past week of travel. Gollum advocates for deception and concealment, his mind shaped by centuries of skulking through places where honest folk fear to tread. Frodo weighs risks with the careful pragmatism of someone who understands that every choice carries consequences beyond the immediate. And Boromir approaches each decision through the lens of military doctrine, always asking not just what might work, but what might go catastrophically wrong. "Tell us about this secret path," Frodo says, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has learned that making no decision is itself a choice, usually the worst one available. Gollum's face brightens with the eager enthusiasm of someone finally being asked to share expertise he values above all else. The tunnel, yes, precious, secret, hidden, forgotten by all but Sméagol. It winds through the mountains, through the rocks, through the dark places where even the orcs fears to go. And why do the orcs fear to go there? Boromir asks, his suspicion evident in every syllable. The question makes Gollum uncomfortable, his hands twisting together in ways that suggest he knows more than he wants to reveal. Dark things lives in the dark places. Yes. Old things. Hungry things. But they sleeps mostly, they does. We can pass quiet, pass careful, if we knows the way. Absolutely not. Boromir's rejection is immediate and final. I will not lead Frodo into a tunnel inhabited by creatures so dangerous that Sauron's own forces avoid the area. Whatever lives in those dark places, it represents a risk we cannot calculate or control. Frodo looks between his two guides, recognizing the fundamental divide in their approaches to the problem before them. Gollum offers a path that avoids the obvious dangers at the cost of introducing unknown ones. Boromir rejects unknown dangers, but hasn't yet proposed an alternative to the obviously impossible frontal approach. "What would you have us do then?" Frodo asks. "If the gate cannot be stormed and the secret path cannot be trusted, how do we reach Mount Doom?" The question hangs in the air between them, heavy with the weight of their entire mission. This is the moment when their quest might end in stalemate, when the combination of impossible odds and unacceptable risks forces them to admit defeat before the final battle has even begun. But Boromir doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he settles more comfortably behind the rocks and pulls from his pack a piece of charcoal and a square of cloth that has seen better days. His hands begin moving across the fabric with the quick, sure strokes of someone sketching from memory. "In the last war against Mordor," he says quietly, his attention focused on the map taking shape beneath his fingers. "Gondor maintained siege lines here for 3 years. My great-grandfather commanded the engineers who built the assault tunnels, the supply routes, the sally ports that allowed our forces to harass the enemy, even when direct assault was impossible. The map that emerges shows not just the Black Gate, but the surrounding terrain, marked with details that exist nowhere in the records accessible to most military minds. Hidden valleys where supplies could be cached, ridgelines that would provide concealed movement, and most importantly, the traces of old Gondorian engineering projects that predate Sauron's current fortifications. "There," Boromir says, pointing to a section of his improvised map. The Henneth Anun approach. My ancestors carved supply tunnels through the rock to allow covert movement of small units. The tunnels were sealed when we withdrew from the siege lines, but the engineering was sound if any of them survive. We could bypass the gate entirely, Frodo finishes, understanding the implications immediately. More than that, we could approach Mount Doom from a direction that Sauron's current defenses don't account for. These tunnels were designed to move soldiers and supplies behind enemy lines. They could move 2 hobbits and their guardians just as easily. Gollum hisses his alarm at this suggestion, his bulbous eyes wide with something that might be genuine terror. No, precious. Not the old tunnels, not the sealed ways. Bad things in the old tunnels, worse things than in our secret places. The nasty Gondorians, they awakened things that should sleeps forever. But Frodo is studying Boromir's map with the focused attention of someone recognizing a genuine alternative to impossible choices. These tunnels, they would take us directly to the heart of Mordor. Close enough, Boromir confirms. The original plan was to allow small forces to strike at Sauron's supply lines from within his own territory. Mount Doom was always a secondary target. The lore masters of that time believed the mountain could be turned to our advantage if we could reach it safely. And you believe these tunnels still exist? After centuries of abandonment and whatever creatures might have moved into them? Boromir considers the question with the careful honesty that has marked all his counsel since his moment of choice at the Falls of Rauros. I believe they were built to last forever. Whether they remain passable, that's a risk we would have to accept. The debate that follows is unlike any they have had since beginning their journey together. For the first time, they have 3 genuine options: the impossible frontal assault through the Black Gate, Gollum's secret path through places where ancient evils wait, or Boromir's proposal to use forgotten military engineering to approach their target from an unexpected direction. Each path offers its own combination of known and unknown dangers. Each requires them to trust different sources of knowledge and different assessments of acceptable risk. And each, in its own way, represents a fundamental choice about who they choose to be in this moment when everything hangs in the balance. We could try them in sequence, Sam suggests, with the practical wisdom that has kept their small company alive through weeks of impossible travel. Start with Captain Boromir's tunnels, and if they prove impassable, fall back to the other options. No, Frodo says firmly. If we enter those tunnels and find them blocked or inhabited by things we cannot face, we lose weeks of travel time we cannot afford. The ring grows heavier with each passing day, and my strength to resist its influence grows weaker. We choose one path and follow it to whatever end awaits us. The weight of final decision settles on the hobbit's shoulders like a physical thing, and for a moment the strain of carrying the ring shows clearly in his face. But when he speaks again, his voice carries the quiet authority of someone who has learned that leadership is not about making perfect choices, but about making necessary ones. We take Boromir's path, he says. The tunnels may be dangerous, but they are dangers we might overcome with courage and skill. The Black Gate offers no hope of success, and Gollum's secret ways. He glances at their guide with something that might be apologetic. I'm sorry, but I cannot lead us into places where you yourself fear what we might encounter. Gollum makes no immediate protest, though his hands continue their nervous twisting. Perhaps he recognizes the logic in Frodo's reasoning, or perhaps he simply understands that his influence over their decision-making has reached its limits. Boromir rolls up his improvised map with careful precision, his movements betraying none of the relief he feels at Frodo's choice. The tunnels represent unknown dangers, yes, but they are military dangers, the kind he has spent his life learning to address. Whatever waits in the forgotten passages of his ancestors, it is more likely to be something he can fight than something he must simply endure. "Then we move tonight," he says, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who has found his proper role in their small company. The tunnels begin 15 miles northeast of here, in country that was once Gondorian territory. If we travel carefully, and Gollum's knowledge of these lands proves accurate, we can reach the entrance before dawn. And if the tunnels are blocked? Boromir's hand finds his horn, the familiar weight of it providing comfort as he contemplates the possibilities ahead. Then we find another way, or we make one. The dead of the last alliance didn't sacrifice themselves so that their descendants could turn back at the first sign of difficulty. As they gather their meager belongings and prepare for what may be their final approach to the heart of enemy territory, each of them carries a different understanding of what the next hours will bring. Gollum follows because he must, his oath binding him to the service of the ring-bearer, regardless of his fears. Sam follows because love demands it, and no danger to himself will ever outweigh his duty to protect Frodo. And Boromir follows because he has finally found the war he was born to fight. Not the endless siege of Osgiliath or the political maneuvering of Minas Tirith, but this small, desperate quest that might determine the fate of everything he has ever loved. The Black Gate looms behind them as they begin their circuitous approach to the tunnels, its dark presence a reminder of the conventional impossibilities they have chosen to avoid. But ahead lies something equally challenging, the test of whether the engineering genius of ancient Gondor can provide a path where courage alone would fail. That test, and the choices it will force upon them, await in the darkness ahead. The sound of water falling over stone should be peaceful. It should carry the promise of rest, of sanctuary, of clean water and safe haven after weeks of traveling through hostile country. But the hidden falls of Henneth Annwn sing a different song to ears that have learned to read danger in every shifting shadow, every unexpected sound that doesn't belong to the natural rhythm of the wild. Boromir freezes at the edge of the clearing, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt as the forest around them comes alive with the subtle signs of human presence. Not orcs. His nose would have caught the stench of them long before his eyes spotted their crude concealment. These are men, and skilled ones, moving with the disciplined precision of rangers who have learned their craft in the unforgiving country between civilization and the enemy's borders. "We're surrounded," he says quietly, his voice pitched to carry only to Frodo and Sam. "Gondorian rangers. By their movement patterns, they've been watching us for at least a quarter mile." Gollum whimpers from his position, crouched behind a fallen log, his pale eyes darting between shadows that might conceal archers. Nasty men with nasty bows, yes, precious. They shoots first, asks questions after. We should runs, should hides. "No," Boromir says firmly. "Rangers of Ithilien are my people. If we run, they'll assume we're spies or worse. If we surrender properly, they'll give us fair hearing. The decision is made for them before they can debate alternatives. Figures emerge from concealment with the fluid grace of men who have spent years learning to move like shadows, when shadows are the difference between life and death. A dozen rangers, their cloaks the mottled green and brown that renders them nearly invisible against the forest backdrop, their bows drawn but not quite aimed. And at their head, stepping into the clearing with the careful authority of someone accustomed to command, walks a man whose face carries the unmistakable stamp of the House of Denethor. Faramir stops short when he sees the small company, his grey eyes widening with an expression that cycles through disbelief, hope, and something very much like joy before settling into the controlled mask of a professional soldier. But the initial reaction tells the story. He believed his brother was dead. "Boromir," he says, and the name carries more weight than any formal greeting could convey. "When we found no trace of you at Amon Hen, when Aragorn's company passed through without word of your fate, we feared the worst." The reunion that follows happens in stages, like watching sunlight gradually illuminate a landscape that has been hidden in shadow. First recognition, sharp and immediate and transformative. Then the careful approach of men who have learned not to trust their hopes too quickly, too completely. Finally, the embrace of brothers who have seen too much death to take each other's survival for granted. "I chose a different path," Boromir says simply, his arms tight around his younger brother's shoulders. "The ring-bearer needed protection, and my duty was clear." Faramir's gaze moves to Frodo with new attention, the kind of careful assessment that sees more than surface details. "So the rumors are true. You carry Isildur's bane into the heart of enemy territory." "We seek to destroy it," Frodo says, his voice carrying the quiet authority that has grown stronger with each mile of their impossible journey. "To cast it into the fires where it was made, where alone it can be unmade. Destroy it." Faramir repeats the words as if testing their weight, their possibility. Not use it against the enemy, but destroy it entirely. "Entirely," Boromir confirms, and there's something in his voice that makes his brother look at him with sharp attention. "I have seen what the ring does to those who seek to use it. Even with the best intentions, it cannot be wielded without becoming its slave." The conversation that follows happens around the hidden pool where Henneth Annan conceals its secret watchers, the rangers maintaining careful distance while their captain speaks with these unexpected travelers. Faramir listens as Boromir explains their route through the dead marshes, their analysis of the Black Gate's defenses, their decision to seek the old siege tunnels that their grandfather once carved through the living rock. But it's when Boromir speaks of the ring's temptation, of the daily struggle to resist its promises, that something fundamental shifts in the dynamic between them. Faramir's attention intensifies, his grey eyes focusing on the hobbit who carries their burden with such matter-of-fact determination. "May I see it?" Faramir asks suddenly. "This thing that has driven my father to the edge of madness, that promises victory to any strong enough to claim it?" The request hangs in the air between them like a blade balanced on its point. Frodo's hand moves instinctively to his chest where the ring lies hidden, while Sam shifts position to place himself between the hobbit and the ranger captain. Even Gollum stops his nervous muttering to watch the exchange with hungry attention. But it's Boromir who speaks first, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Brother," he says quietly, "I tell you this, or someone who came within a heartbeat of making the worst mistake of his life. Do not look upon it with desire. Do not let yourself imagine what it might accomplish in your hands. That way lies madness and betrayal of everything we have sworn to protect." Faramir's eyes meet his brother's across the small space, and in that gaze, Boromir sees the reflection of his own struggle played out in a different key. The same love for Gondor, the same desperate need to protect their people, the same temptation to believe that any weapon might be justified if it could end the suffering and the siege. "The burden is heavy," Frodo says softly, understanding perhaps better than anyone what passes between the brothers. "It grows heavier with each day, each mile, each choice we make. But the heaviest part is not its weight. The heaviest part is knowing that anyone who tries to help carry it will be corrupted by it. Yet you allow my brother to travel with you. Because he already faced the temptation and chose correctly, Frodo replies. Because his strength helps me remember my own. Because sometimes the best way to resist something is not to struggle alone, but to struggle alongside someone who understands the cost of failing. Faramir nods slowly, his attention moving between the hobbit and his brother as understanding dawns. You help each other resist. We try, Boromir says. It's not perfect protection. The ring finds new ways to tempt, new arguments for why its use might be justified. But speaking the temptation aloud, hearing how hollow its promises sound when shared with someone you trust, that makes it bearable. The wisdom in this approach becomes clear when Faramir's next question reveals the depth of his own desperation. Our city is under siege, he says, his controlled voice betraying none of the anguish that shows in his eyes. Osgiliath has fallen, the armies of Mordor mass before the Pelennor, and our father grows stranger with each day of isolation and pressure. If there were a weapon that could turn the tide, that could save Minas Tirith and all the people sheltering behind its walls. The ring would not save them, Boromir says firmly, cutting through his brother's speculation before it can fully form. It would corrupt the very thing we seek to protect. Gondor saved by the ring would not be Gondor. It would be another form of Mordor, beautiful perhaps, but no less destructive to everything we truly value. The white tree would still grow in the court of the fountain. Would it? When the soil beneath it was watered with the blood of innocents, when the halls of healing became halls of interrogation, when the library became a collection of surveillance reports. Boromir's voice carries the certainty of someone who has seen this future in his darkest moments of temptation. The ring does not make us stronger, Faramir. It makes us into something else, entirely, something that wears our face while serving purposes we would never choose if we remained ourselves. Sam watches this exchange with the careful attention of someone who has spent months learning to recognize the ring's influence on those around it. When Faramir's gaze drifts toward Frodo again, toward the hidden weight of the thing they discuss, Sam clears his throat with pointed emphasis. "Begging your pardon, Captain, but you might want to look away about now. Gets easier to think straight when you're not staring at where the thing is hidden." The advice is practical, offered without judgment, but with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who has watched the ring work its influence on stronger minds than his own. Faramir follows it, turning his attention to the waterfall that gives their hidden refuge its name, and visibly relaxes as the immediate pressure of proximity lessens. "You're right," he says after a moment. "Even knowing what it is, even hearing your warnings, there's something about its presence that makes every argument for caution sound like cowardice." "That's its greatest strength," Frodo says. "It doesn't convince you to do evil. It convinces you that there's no difference between good and evil when the stakes are high enough. The rangers who surround their small council maintain their professional distance, but Boromir can see the strain in their faces as they struggle with the implications of what they've overheard. These are men who have given their lives to the defense of Gondor, who have watched their city slowly strangled by siege and isolation. The temptation to believe in easy answers, in weapons that could end the suffering without cost, runs as deep in them as it does in their captain. "What news of Aragorn?" Boromir asks, seeking to redirect the conversation toward tactical realities rather than moral philosophy. "Did he reach Rohan safely? Has word come of the king's response to our need?" "He passed through our territory 10 days ago," Faramir confirms. riding hard for Edoras with the elf and the dwarf, and 2 hobbits whose courage belied their size. But whether he reached the Golden Hall, whether Theoden answered his call, we have heard nothing. Our scouts range no farther west than the borders of Ithilien. 10 days ago. Time enough for Aragorn to reach Rohan, time enough for negotiations, time enough for armies to march if Theoden chose to honor the old alliance, but also time enough for refusal, for delay, for any of a dozen catastrophes that could leave Minas Tirith standing alone against the gathering darkness. And our father? Boromir asks the question he most fears to hear answered, grows stranger daily. He speaks of fire, of endings, of choices that no one should have to make. The guards report that he spends hours in the Palantir chamber, though none dare ask what he sees there. Faramir's voice carries the weight of someone watching a loved one slowly disappear into madness. He gave orders 3 days ago that if the city falls, the tombs of the kings are to be prepared for all who bear the blood of Númenor. The implication hits Boromir like a physical blow. His father, in his despair and isolation, contemplates not just his own death, but some grand gesture that would take the royal line with him rather than see it survive defeat. It's madness, but madness with a terrible internal logic that makes it all the more dangerous. I have to go back, Boromir says suddenly, the words torn from him before conscious thought can intervene. Whatever happens with the ring, whatever success or failure awaits this quest, I cannot let my father destroy himself and our family line in a moment of despair. No, Frodo says firmly, his small hand finding Boromir's arm with surprising strength. Your father's madness is not your responsibility. Your duty is here, with this mission that might save all of Gondor, if we can complete it. And if we fail? If the ring proves impossible to destroy, if we die in the attempt, if Sauron reclaims it and turns its power against the remaining free peoples, what then becomes of the duty I owe to my family, my city, my people? It's the fundamental tension that has shadowed their entire journey, the conflict between immediate duty and ultimate purpose, between saving those you can see and protecting those you may never meet, standing here in the hidden refuge of Henneth Anun, with water falling and rangers watching and his brother's grey eyes reflecting his own anguish. Boromir faces the choice that will define not just his own fate, but the fate of the mission that has brought him so far from home. The ring remains hidden beneath Frodo's shirt, but its presence fills the space between them like a physical thing. Somewhere in its golden depths lie answers to questions that none of them want to ask, solutions to problems that all of them fear to contemplate. And somewhere beyond the waterfalls, beyond the forests and plains and rivers that separate them from home, the white city of Minas Tirith waits for rescue that may never come. That's the choice Boromir must make, between the duty he can see and the duty he can only hope will matter. Between the brother standing before him and the hobbits who trust him with their lives. Between the certain knowledge of his people's need and the uncertain promise of the ring's destruction. Some choices, he's beginning to understand, define you regardless of whether they turn out to be right. This is one of those choices. There are decisions that cut through a man like a blade, leaving wounds that never properly heal. Standing in the hidden chamber behind the waterfall at Henneth Anun, watching his brother's face carry the weight of Gondor's desperate need, Boromir feels such a decision carving its way through his chest with surgical precision. Every argument for returning to Minas Tirith sounds like duty, honor, filial love. Every argument for continuing with Frodo sounds like abandonment, cowardice, the betrayal of everything he was raised to hold sacred. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that both sides are right. Faramir stands before him with the controlled desperation of someone who has been carrying burdens too heavy for one man's shoulders, speaking in the measured tones of a military briefing, while his grey eyes plead for the return of the older brother who has always been their father's heir, their people's hope. "You could make the difference," he says quietly. "Your voice still carries weight with the men. Your presence on the walls would be worth 1,000 soldiers when the final assault comes. And how long would that 1,000 soldiers buy us?" Boromir asks, though the question tears at something fundamental in his chest. A day? A week? Sauron's armies number in the hundreds of thousands. Even if I returned, even if my presence rallied every able-bodied man in the city, we would still fall. The only question is whether we fall fighting or fall despairing. There is honor in falling while fighting. There is meaning in standing with your people when the darkness comes for them. The words hit home because they echo every lesson their father ever taught them, every story told in the great hall of their ancestors who chose to die rather than yield, who valued the manner of their ending above the mere fact of their survival. Boromir can hear Denethor's voice in his brother's argument, can feel the pull of traditions that stretch back through generations of men who believed that some things matter more than living through them. But he can also hear something else, Frodo's quiet voice explaining that the ring offers easy answers to impossible problems, that it whispers of ways to save everyone you love without counting the cost to everyone else. The temptation to believe that Gondor's need trumps Middle-earth's need sounds suspiciously like the temptation he has learned to recognize and resist. "May I?" Frodo asks quietly, his small hand moving to the chain around his neck. "There is something I would like to show you both." Boromir starts to protest. They have all learned the wisdom of not looking directly at the ring unless absolutely necessary, but something in the hobbit's expression stops him. This is not the fevered desperation of someone succumbing to its influence. This is the careful precision of someone who understands exactly what he's doing and why it's necessary. Frodo draws the ring from beneath his shirt, holding it on his palm where it catches the light filtering through the waterfall. But instead of the seductive golden radiance that usually draws the eye and clouds the mind, it looks almost ordinary in this moment. A simple band of metal, unremarkable except for the strange way shadows seem to gather around it. "Look at it," Frodo says. "Really look at it. Not at what it promises, but at what it is." Faramir's eyes are drawn to the ring despite himself, and for a moment his face shows the familiar signs of its influence. The widening of pupils, the slight forward lean, the expression of someone hearing offers too good to resist. But then something shifts, and his attention moves past the ring itself to the hobbit who holds it. "You look tired," he says suddenly. Not just physically tired, but diminished, as if something essential is being slowly drained from you. "Every day," Frodo confirms. "Every hour, every mile, every choice I make while carrying this thing. It takes something from me that I will never get back, even if we succeed in destroying it." Boromir studies his brother's face and sees the moment when understanding arrives. Faramir is realizing that the ring-bearer's sacrifice is not theoretical, not something that might be required if their mission fails. It is happening right now, has been happening since the moment Frodo accepted the burden in Rivendell, will continue happening until either the ring is destroyed or it claims another victim. "This is what we're asking you to choose," Frodo continues, his voice gentle but implacable. "Not between duty and cowardice, but between the visible suffering of those you know and the invisible suffering of those you will never meet. Between saving Gondor and saving the world that contains Gondor. I release you from your oath, Frodo says suddenly, the words carrying the formal weight of a legal pronouncement. You swore to protect the ring-bearer until the mission was complete. I hereby release you from that oath. Your duty to your city and your family takes precedence over any promise made to me. The release should feel like freedom, like the lifting of an impossible burden that has carried him far from everything he was born to protect. Instead, it feels like amputation. The sudden absence of obligation leaves him aware of how much his commitment to Frodo has become part of his identity, part of his understanding of who he is and what he values. If I go, he says slowly, working through the logic aloud, what happens to this quest? We continue as we planned, Sam says firmly. Mr. Frodo and me and our guide. We've come this far, haven't we? We'll find a way to go the rest of the distance. Through siege tunnels you've never seen, past defenses you can't imagine, into the heart of Sauron's power, where every step might be your last. Boromir's military mind catalogues the obstacles they would face without his knowledge of Gondorian engineering, without his sword arm, without his horn to rally them if they face pursuit. You would die within a day of entering Mordor proper. Maybe, Frodo acknowledges, but people die in wars regardless. The question is whether their deaths serve a purpose larger than themselves. The conversation that follows happens in the strange, timeless space that opens around decisions of ultimate consequence. Faramir argues for blood loyalty, for the responsibility of the firstborn son to stand with his people in their darkest hour. Frodo argues for nothing, having already released Boromir from any obligation to continue. Sam and Gollum watch in silence, understanding that this choice belongs to the captain of Gondor alone. And Boromir himself stands at the center of it all, feeling the weight of his horn against his hip, and remembering all the times it has called for aid, called for rescue, called for reinforcement when the battle seemed lost. Now it could call him home, could summon him to the familiar duty of standing on walls he has defended since boyhood and dying if necessary, among people who know his name and value his sacrifice. But there are other walls than those of Minas Tirith, other people who need defending. And somewhere in the mathematics of greater and lesser goods, in the cold calculation of what saves the most lives and preserves the most hope, the answer becomes clear. I cannot go back, he says quietly, the words emerging from some deep place that has been waiting his whole life to speak this particular truth. Not because I don't love our city, not because I don't fear for our father and our people, but because my oath was not just to protect Frodo until the mission was complete. It was to see that the mission itself succeeded, regardless of what that success might cost me personally. Faramir's face shows no surprise, only the quiet acceptance of someone who has always known his brother well enough to predict his choices in moments of ultimate testing. I hoped you would say that, he admits. I argued for your return because I needed to know you had considered every alternative. But I would have thought less of you if you had chosen the smaller duty over the larger one. The smaller duty. Boromir repeats the words, as if testing their weight. Defending the greatest city of men, saving the lives of tens of thousands of our people. You call that the smaller duty? I call it the duty you can see, Faramir says gently. The larger duty is the one that saves people you will never meet, in lands you will never visit, for reasons you will never fully understand. That's what makes it larger, not the number of lives involved, but the scope of the trust required to pursue it. The horn at Boromir's side seems heavier now, weighted with all the calls it will never make, all the reinforcements it will never summon, all the last stands it will never rally. But when he touches it, the weight feels right. Not the weight of burden, but the weight of purpose found and accepted. "I have intelligence about Mordor's defenses," he says, turning his mind to practical matters because the emotional ones are too vast to sustain indefinitely. "Weaknesses I've observed in their patrol patterns, gaps in their supply lines that could be exploited by a determined force. And I know the locations of the old siege tunnels, the ones we plan to use. If anything happens to our mission, if we fail to reach Mount Doom, someone should know about these alternatives." The briefing that follows has the crisp efficiency of two professional soldiers sharing tactical information under pressure. Boromir speaks of what he has seen in their weeks of travel, the patterns of orc movement, the places where Sauron's forces show signs of overextension. Faramir listens with the careful attention of someone who might need to use this information to save lives, asking the precise questions that will help him remember what matters most. "And our father?" Faramir asks when the tactical discussion concludes. Boromir considers this, the hardest question in a conversation full of impossible choices. What message do you send to a man slowly drowning in despair, a man whose love for his sons has become tangled with his fear for his city until he cannot distinguish between them? "Tell him that his sons understand duty," Boromir says finally. "Tell him that we learned from his example what it means to serve something larger than ourselves, even when that service requires sacrifices he would not choose for us. Tell him." He pauses, searching for words adequate to a love that has shaped his entire life. "Tell him that I carry his lessons with me into the darkness, and that they light my way better than any torch or flame." "I will tell him," Faramir promises, "and I will make sure he knows that his heir chose the harder path, not because he loved Gondor less, but because he understood what loving Gondor actually requires." They embrace then, brothers who have always known this moment would come in one form or another, who have spent their lives preparing for the day when duty would demand they stand in different places against the same darkness. There are no tears, no dramatic declarations, just the quiet acknowledgement of men who understand that love sometimes requires letting go. When they part, Faramir's grey eyes hold no accusation, no plea for reconsideration. Only respect for a choice that he might not make himself, but can recognize as worthy of the man making it. "Go well, my brother," he says simply. "Come back if you can. But if you cannot, know that your choice was worthy of our father's son and our city's captain." Boromir nods once, his hand finding his horn one final time before turning away from everything he has ever known toward the uncertain darkness that waits beyond the eastern borders of the world he was born to protect. Behind him, Faramir will return to Minas Tirith, carrying tactical intelligence that might make the difference between victory and defeat. Ahead lies only the promise that some duties are larger than love, some sacrifices necessary regardless of their personal cost. The choice is made. The path is clear. And somewhere in the mathematics of war and peace, hope and despair, the equation that will determine the fate of Middle-earth has shifted by exactly one man's decision to trust in purposes he cannot see rather than needs he understands all too well. Whether that shift is enough remains to be discovered. But at least now it has been made by someone who counted the full cost before accepting the payment it required. That acceptance, Boromir is beginning to understand, may be the closest thing to heroism that is actually available to ordinary men who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. The willingness to pay prices you cannot afford for outcomes you may never see, because someone must be willing to pay them, and you happen to be here when the bill comes due. It's not the heroism of the songs, but it might be the heroism that actually matters. The tunnel mouth yawns before them, like the throat of some primordial beast, carved into the living rock of the mountains that guard Mordor's western approach. Even in daylight, shadows pool in its depths with an unnatural thickness that speaks of things older and hungrier than the wars of men and orcs. The air that drifts from within carries scents that make the horses of Rohan shy away. Old death, ancient malice, and something else. Something that sets the primitive warning systems of the mind screaming that this place was never meant for the feet of the living. Gollum crouches at the entrance with barely contained excitement, his pale hands gesturing eagerly toward the darkness beyond. Here, precious, here. The secret way, the safe way, the way the nasty orcs don't know about. We goes in quiet, we goes in careful, and soon we has passed all their watching and their waiting. But Boromir's instincts, honed by years of warfare against enemies who specialize in ambush and deception, read the situation with growing alarm. Everything about this approach feels wrong. The positioning of the tunnel relative to known Mordorian patrol routes, the lack of any defensive works that would normally guard such an obvious weakness in their border security, and most especially the eager enthusiasm with which their guide advocates for this particular path. "Stop," he says quietly, his hand moving to his sword hilt as his eyes scan the rocky approaches for signs of concealed watchers. Something is not right here. Sam freezes mid-step, his hobbit's practical wisdom recognizing the authority in Boromir's voice, even when he doesn't understand the source of alarm. "What is it, Captain? Orcs?" "I wish it were orcs." Boromir moves closer to the tunnel mouth, but carefully, with the measured caution of someone who has survived too many battlefields to discount the warning whispers of his subconscious mind. "Orcs I could handle. This feels like something else entirely." Gollum's face twists with what might be annoyance or might be something more calculating. The tall man is being silly, yes, precious, fearful of shadows, fearful of the dark places where we must go to avoid the nasty watchers. There is nothing in the tunnel, nothing but stone and air and the quick way to our destination. "Then why do you keep looking over your shoulder?" Boromir asks sharply. "Why do your hands shake when you speak of what lies beyond the entrance? And why, in all our weeks of travel, have you never mentioned the name of this place?" The questions hit their mark. Gollum's composure, never particularly stable under the best of circumstances, begins to crack under direct interrogation. His bulbous eyes dart between the tunnel entrance and his three companions, calculating odds and possibilities with the frantic energy of someone whose carefully laid plans are unraveling. "Cirith Ungol," Frodo says suddenly, the name emerging from some deep well of half-remembered lore. "That's what this place is called, isn't it? The Spider's Pass." Gollum flinches, as if struck, his whole body recoiling from the words like they carry physical force. Nasty names, cruel names. The fat hobbit shouldn't speak such words aloud. She might hear, might listen, might come to see what disturbs her rest. "She," Boromir repeats the pronoun with grim understanding flooding through him. "Not orcs, then. Something else. Something you've been planning to deliver us to from the beginning." The confrontation that follows has the brutal efficiency of a military tribunal. Boromir's questions come with the relentless precision of someone trained to extract tactical intelligence from reluctant sources, while Gollum's answers grow increasingly evasive, until even Frodo can see the shape of the betrayal being revealed. "The creature in the tunnel," Boromir says, when the essential facts have been established. This Shelob. She's why there are no orc patrols here, why this route appears unguarded. Because Sauron's servants know better than to venture where she hunts. And you planned to feed us to her, Sam adds, his voice carrying a cold anger that transforms his usually cheerful face into something considerably more dangerous. Lead us into her web like flies, hoping she'd take the ring-bearer and leave you free to claim your precious for yourself. Gollum makes no direct denial, which is confession enough. Instead, he whimpers and cringes, his hands twisting together in the familiar gesture of someone caught between conflicting oaths and desperate desires. We didn't want to, precious. We hates the plan, hates the risk. But the other ways, the safe ways, they's all watched now. The eye sees too much, knows too much. Only through her tunnel can we pass unseen. Then we find another way, Boromir says firmly. We go back, we circle around, we wait for better weather or darker nights. We do not willingly enter the lair of something that even Sauron's creatures fear to approach. But even as he speaks, they all hear the sound that makes retreat impossible. The harsh voices of orc patrols approaching from the south, moving with the purposeful coordination of a sweep designed to drive quarry toward a predetermined killing ground. Gollum's betrayal may have been thwarted, but the trap itself remains perfectly functional. They're herding us, Frodo realizes with grim clarity. Whether Gollum planned it or not, we're being forced into the tunnel. The only choice is between whatever waits in the darkness and certain death at the hands of the patrols. Then we go forward, Boromir says, accepting the inevitable with the practiced stoicism of someone who has faced impossible odds before. But we go as soldiers, not as prey, and we go together. The preparations that follow have the swift efficiency of a military unit preparing for combat under pressure. Boromir checks his sword and considers the tactical requirements of fighting in confined spaces against an enemy of unknown capabilities. Sam hefts his small blade and positions himself to guard Frodo's back. Even Frodo draws his elven sword, its blue glow providing welcome light as they move into the oppressive darkness of the tunnel. Only Gollum seems reluctant to continue, his plans disrupted by their awareness of the danger ahead. But his oath binds him to guide them regardless of his personal preferences, and the approaching voices of the Orc patrol make delay impossible. The tunnel proves to be exactly as unpleasant as the entrance promised. Ancient stonework gives way to natural cave formations, then to something that might be natural if nature had developed a taste for architectural malevolence. The walls glisten with moisture that moves in patterns too regular to be condensation, while the floor beneath their feet carries the unpleasant suggestion of things that crunch when stepped upon. They have been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when Boromir calls a halt, his soldiers' instincts reading signs of danger that his conscious mind struggles to interpret. The air moves differently here, carrying scents and sounds that speak of vast open spaces beyond the narrow confines of their path. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, something large shifts position with the deliberate patience of a predator that knows its prey has no choice but to come within reach. "She's here," Gollum whispers, his voice carrying a mixture of terror and anticipation. She knows we comes, knows we brings her gifts. Soon she takes what she wants, and we can go on our way with what remains. "Not today," Boromir says quietly, his sword coming free of its sheath with the whisper of steel on leather. "Not ever, if I have anything to say about it." The battle that follows transforms from ambush to engagement through the simple expedient of being anticipated. When Shelob descends from her web with the crushing weight of malevolent hunger, she finds not confused prey stumbling through the darkness, but 3 determined opponents who have had time to prepare their ground and coordinate their response. Boromir meets her initial rush with the disciplined fury of someone trained in the specific techniques required for fighting creatures larger and stronger than any human opponent. His sword finds the gaps between her armored segments, while his footwork keeps him clear of the crushing mandibles that could sever him in half. Each strike is calculated not for immediate killing, but for accumulated damage, the patient work of bringing down something too large to defeat with a single blow. Sam fights with the desperate courage of someone protecting the most important thing in his world, his simple blade proving surprisingly effective when guided by love and determination. He stays close to Frodo, guarding his flanks, while the ring-bearer's elven sword adds its own blue fire to the battle. But it's the coordination between them that makes the difference. 3 fighters working as a unit, each covering the other's weaknesses, while exploiting every advantage their preparation has given them. When Shelob's attention focuses on one, the others strike at her exposed flanks. When her massive bulk threatens to overwhelm them through sheer size, they use the confined space of the tunnel to limit her mobility. The turning point comes when Boromir manages to drive his sword deep into one of Shelob's eyes, the elven blade biting through the ancient armor with a sound like breaking crystal. The giant spider reels back with a shriek that echoes through the tunnel like the voices of the damned, her movements becoming erratic as pain and fury override the cold calculation that has made her the terror of this pass. But victory comes with its own price. In her death throes, Shelob's stinger finds its mark, striking Boromir across the shoulder with venom that burns like liquid fire. He falls to one knee, his sword clattering from nerveless fingers as poison floods his system with a speed that speaks of thousands of years of evolutionary refinement. "Boromir!" Frodo cries, moving to his fallen protector's side, even as Shelob's massive form begins the slow collapse that marks the end of her ancient hunger. "I'm all right," Boromir gasps, though the words come with obvious effort. "Just need a moment to recover. The venom, it's strong, but not fatal, not immediately." Sam examines the wound with the practical efficiency of someone who has tended many injuries, his face grim as he notes the discoloration spreading from the puncture site. "We need to get you help, Captain. This isn't something we can handle with field dressings and wishful thinking." But even as they speak, the sound of approaching voices reminds them that their battle has not gone unnoticed. The orc patrols, drawn by Shelob's death, shriek, are closing in on the tunnel entrance with the purposeful speed of soldiers investigating a potential breach in their security. "We have to move," Frodo says, accepting the harsh logic of their situation. "We can't help anyone if we're captured here." Boromir nods, accepting Sam's support as he struggles to his feet. The poison makes his movements clumsy, his thoughts sluggish, but it hasn't yet reached the point where travel becomes impossible. With careful management and frequent rest, he might last long enough to see their mission through. "The spider is dead," he says, with quiet satisfaction, looking back at Shelob's motionless form. "Whatever else happens, that ancient evil will trouble no more travelers. Sometimes, the best you can hope for is to make sure your sacrifice serves a purpose larger than your own survival." They gather their scattered gear and continue deeper into the tunnel, leaving behind the corpse of something that has terrorized this pass since the world was young. Behind them, the orc patrols discover their dead guardian and raise alarms that echo through the mountains. Ahead lies the heart of Mordor, and the final test of their impossible mission. But for now, for these precious moments stolen from the teeth of disaster, they have won something worth having. Proof that even the oldest evils can be defeated when faced with courage, preparation, and the willingness to fight as one against the darkness. That victory, and the wound that brought it, carry them forward into whatever trials await beyond the tunnel's end. The poison works through Boromir's system, with the methodical precision of something designed by ancient malice to cause maximum suffering over extended time. 3 days since Shelob's stinger found its mark. 3 days of travelling through the ash-choked wasteland of Mordor, while the venom gradually transforms his blood into liquid fire, and his thoughts into scattered fragments that refuse to hold their shape for more than a few moments at a time. But he continues to walk, one step after another, his hand gripping Sam's shoulder when the world tilts too far to one side, his soldier's instincts operating on something deeper than conscious thought to keep them moving toward their destination. The ring grows heavier with each mile they cover, its presence pressing against his mind like a physical weight. But even that familiar temptation feels distant now, filtered through layers of pain that make everything else seem less immediate, less real. "Rest," Sam says quietly, guiding Boromir to a boulder that offers concealment from the orc patrols that crisscross this desolate landscape with increasing frequency. "You're pushing too hard, Captain. The poison needs time to work its way through your system." "The poison needs time to kill me," Boromir corrects, with the matter-of-fact honesty that has marked all his speech since the wound began its slow work of destruction. "Time we don't have. Every hour we delay increases the chance that we'll be discovered, captured, or simply collapse short of our destination." Frodo settles beside them, his own exhaustion evident in the careful way he moves, the deliberate conservation of energy that speaks of someone operating at the very limits of his endurance. The ring's weight has grown almost unbearable as they've approached the place of its making, and only the desperate knowledge that they're too close to fail now keeps him moving forward. "How much farther?" he asks, though they all know the answer. Mount Doom looms before them like a wounded giant, its smoking peak visible through the haze of ash and industrial smoke that chokes the air. Perhaps 10 miles, perhaps 15. A day's hard march under normal circumstances, but these circumstances stopped being normal sometime around the point when they entered the realm of the Dark Lord, with nothing but hope and determination to sustain them. "Far enough," Boromir says, studying the terrain ahead, with eyes that still retain their military precision despite the fever that makes his hands shake. "The road becomes more difficult from here. We'll be climbing, moving through areas where concealment becomes impossible. And the patrols—" He gestures toward a column of orcs marching along the main road, their black banners snapping in the hot wind that carries the scent of sulphur and burning rock. They've been fortunate so far, if fortune can be said to apply to their desperate circumstances. Boromir's knowledge of military movement patterns, combined with Sam's practical wisdom about staying hidden and Frodo's growing sensitivity to the ring's pull on enemy attention, has allowed them to avoid the worst of Sauron's security measures. But as they approach Mount Doom itself, the very heart of the Dark Lord's power, such evasions become increasingly difficult. "There," Boromir says, pointing toward a ravine that cuts through the rocky slopes leading to the mountain's base. An old lava channel, carved when the mountain was more active than it is now. It'll provide cover for most of the approach, but... He pauses, his breathing becoming labored, as another wave of venom-induced fever washes through him. But it requires climbing, sustained effort over rough terrain. In my current condition, I'm not sure I can manage it. The admission costs him something essential, some final reserve of professional pride that has sustained him through decades of military service. To acknowledge physical limitation, to admit that his body might fail his will at the moment, when everything depends on his ability to continue. It goes against every lesson his father ever taught him about duty and sacrifice. Then we find another way, Sam says firmly. There's no point in reaching Mount Doom if we don't all get there together. We've come too far to lose anyone now. But even as he speaks, they all understand the mathematics of their situation. Every hour, Boromir's condition deteriorates. Every mile they travel at a pace accommodated to his weakness increases the risk of discovery and failure. The ring cannot wait for his recovery, and their mission cannot be postponed until he regains his strength. No, Frodo says quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has spent months learning to make impossible decisions. Sam is right that we go together. But we go now, while we still can, and we accept whatever pace that requires. Better to reach our destination slowly than to not reach it at all. The climb that follows tests all of them in different ways. For Frodo, it's the increasing weight of the ring, the sensation that each step upward requires him to drag along the accumulated malice of ages. For Sam, it's the double burden of supporting his master while also staying alert for signs that Boromir's condition is deteriorating beyond the point of safe travel. And for Boromir, it's the simple challenge of placing one foot in front of the other, while poison courses through his veins, and fever makes the landscape waver like something seen through water. But his military training serves him even here. The automatic responses drilled into him through years of forced marches and combat operations, allowing him to function even when conscious thought becomes unreliable. "Watch the left flank," he whispers during one of their brief rests, his eyes tracking movement that the others cannot yet see. "Orc patrol, moving along the ridge line. They'll pass within 50 yards of our position in the next few minutes." Sam peers through the rocks that conceal them, eventually spotting the black shapes moving against the red glow of the mountain's fires. "How did you see them? I can barely make them out even knowing where to look." "Practice," Boromir replies simply. 30 years of watching for enemies who don't want to be seen. The mind learns to recognize patterns, to spot things that don't belong, even when the eyes can't consciously identify what's wrong. The patrol passes without detecting them, but its proximity serves as a reminder of how precarious their position has become. They're deep in enemy territory now, surrounded by forces that would kill them instantly if discovered. Only Boromir's expertise and Frodo's growing instinctive understanding of the ring's effects on nearby enemies allows them to continue undetected. "The ring calls to them," Frodo says, as the orc voices fade into the distance. "I can feel their attention like a physical weight whenever they come near. It wants to be found, wants to return to its master. Every step toward Mount Doom makes that pull stronger." "Can you resist it?" Boromir asks, though the effort of speaking clearly exhausts him. "When we reach the cracks of Doom, when you stand at the precipice where it was made, will you have the strength to cast it into the fire?" The question hangs between them, like a blade balanced on its point. It's the central uncertainty that has shadowed their entire quest, the possibility that has haunted Frodo's dreams since leaving Rivendell. The ring's power grows stronger as they approach its source, while his own strength diminishes with each mile of carrying its weight. The mathematics of endurance and temptation may not resolve in their favor. "I don't know," Frodo admits with devastating honesty. "I hope so. I intend to try. But I can feel the ring working on my mind, showing me visions of what I could accomplish if I claimed it instead of destroying it. Those visions become more compelling every hour we spend in this place." "Then we make sure you don't have to face that choice alone," Sam says with fierce determination. Whatever happens at Mount Doom, whatever the ring whispers or promises or threatens, you'll have friends beside you to remind you who you really are. Boromir nods, though the gesture sends another wave of dizziness washing through him. The ring's greatest weapon is isolation. It makes you believe that you're facing its temptations alone, that no one else can understand the burden you carry. But we understand, Frodo. We've all felt its pull, all wrestled with the arguments it makes for why its use might be justified. And we've all chosen, when the moment came, to resist. Sam adds, that choice doesn't become easier with repetition, but it does become more familiar, and familiar territory is easier to navigate than unknown ground. As they resume their climb toward Mount Doom's base, the wisdom in Sam's observation becomes clear. Each of them has faced the ring's temptation in their own way, has learned to recognize its voice, and developed strategies for turning away from its offers. That shared experience creates a foundation of mutual support that individual resistance might lack. But the mountain ahead promises to test that support in ways none of them can fully anticipate. In the place where the ring was forged, where Sauron's power runs deepest, the temptations will be stronger than anything they've yet encountered. And they will face those temptations with Boromir dying by degrees, his strength fading even as his resolve remains unshaken. The math of that equation, growing temptation against diminishing resistance, ultimate stakes against failing capabilities, will determine not just their personal fates, but the fate of all Middle-earth. And somewhere in the red glow of Mount Doom's fires, in the heart of the mountain where gold was first corrupted into something that serves only itself, that equation will find its final resolution. Whether that resolution comes through triumph or disaster remains to be discovered. But at least now they will face it together, bound by shared purpose and mutual support that the ring's isolation cannot entirely break. That bond, fragile as it may prove against the powers they must yet confront, carries them upward through the desolation toward whatever ending awaits in the darkness ahead. And if Boromir's horn never sounds again, if his voice grows too weak to offer counsel or encouragement, at least his presence will remind them that some sacrifices are worth making, that some duties transcend the fear of personal loss. In the shadow of Mount Doom, with the ring's weight growing heavier and the poison's work growing stronger, that reminder may be the difference between salvation and catastrophe, the difference between completing a mission that began in the green lands of the Shire and ending as just another tale of heroic failure told around fires in the houses of the free peoples. That difference, measured in steps and breaths, and the simple determination to continue despite everything, carries them forward into the final test of their impossible journey. The Sammath Naur opens before them like the mouth of creation itself, a vast chamber carved from the living rock of Mount Doom, where the world's first gold was corrupted into something that serves only malice and dominion. The heat here transcends mere temperature, becoming something that attacks the lungs and makes the eyes water, while the red glow of molten rock casts everything in the color of spilled blood. Boromir stands at the threshold, supported by Sam's steady strength, his consciousness wavering between fevered hallucination and grim clarity as the poison completes its slow work of destruction. 3 weeks since Shelob's stinger found its mark, 3 weeks of fighting the venom's advance while continuing to fulfill his oath to protect the ring-bearer. Now, at the very edge of success or failure, his body finally reaches the limits of what will and duty can accomplish, but his eyes remain clear enough to see what happens when Frodo steps onto the narrow bridge that spans the chasm where the ring was forged. The change is immediate and terrible. The small hobbit who has carried this burden across half of Middle-earth, who has resisted temptation and corruption through months of impossible trials, suddenly straightens with an authority that transforms his entire being. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of power that has slept too long and wakes hungry for dominion. "I do not choose now to do what I came to do," Frodo declares, his words echoing through the chamber with unnatural clarity. "I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." The declaration hits Boromir like a physical blow, not because it's unexpected. He has seen the ring's growing influence over recent days, but because it represents the collapse of everything they have sacrificed to achieve. Here, at the very precipice of victory, when the ring's destruction lies within arm's reach, their mission fails not through external opposition, but through the corruption of the one person they trusted to remain pure. And in that moment of crisis, with Frodo claiming the ring and Sam crying out in horror, and the very air seeming to thicken with malevolent triumph, Boromir feels the final and greatest temptation of his life settling around him, like a crown offered by invisible hands. Take it. The hobbit has failed, proven himself unworthy of the trust placed in him. The ring belongs to someone strong enough to use it properly, someone with the wisdom to wield its power for the protection of the innocent. Take it, and save Gondor. Take it, and save Middle-earth itself from the chaos that will follow if Sauron reclaims his prize. The whisper comes not from outside, but from within, from the deepest part of his mind, where duty and love and desperate hope have been twisted into shapes that serve the ring's purpose. It would be so easy, so perfectly justified. Frodo has betrayed their trust, abandoned their mission at the crucial moment. Someone must step forward to complete what he cannot, to make the hard choices that preserve the greater good. Boromir's hand moves toward his sword hilt, his body responding to the ring's call with movements that feel ordained by fate itself. 3 steps would bring him to the bridge where Frodo stands. His remaining strength would be sufficient to overwhelm the hobbit's defenses. The ring could be his in moments, its power available for the salvation of everyone he has ever loved. But then he sees Sam. The loyal gardener stands frozen in shock, his face showing the naked grief of someone watching his dearest friend transform into something unrecognizable. There are tears on Sam's cheeks, not of fear but of heartbreak, the tears of someone who has given everything to protect another person, only to watch them choose destruction at the moment of triumph. And in that grief, Boromir sees the reflection of his own choice at the falls of Rauros, the moment when he almost made the same decision that tempts him now. He remembers the weight of Frodo's forgiveness, the grace that allowed him to continue despite his failure. He remembers the lesson that mercy sometimes requires trusting in purposes larger than immediate understanding. "No," he says quietly, the word emerging from some place deeper than conscious thought. "Not again. Never again." Instead of reaching for his sword, Boromir reaches for Sam's shoulder, lending his failing strength to the hobbit's desperate purpose. "Help me," he whispers, his voice barely audible over the roar of the mountain's fires. "Help me save him from himself." Together, they move toward the bridge, where Frodo stands, transfixed by the ring's power, his small hands cradling the golden band as if it were the most precious thing in all creation. The air around him shimmers with heat that has nothing to do with Mount Doom's fires, while shadows gather at his feet in patterns that speak of dominion and control. But even as they approach, another figure emerges from the tunnel behind them, moving with the fluid desperation of someone whose entire existence has been reduced to a single overwhelming need. Gollum's pale form flows across the stone floor like spilled water, his bulbous eyes fixed on the ring with an intensity that makes everything else, the heat, the danger, even the presence of his erstwhile companions, fade into insignificance. "Precious!" he screams, his voice carrying centuries of longing and loss. "Our birthday present. The fat hobbit has it, keeps it, but we will takes it back. Yes, precious. Takes it back for Smeagol, who found it first." The creature's arrival transforms the chamber from a place of individual crisis into a battlefield where 4 different purposes collide with devastating force. Frodo clutches the ring closer to his chest, his hobbit's features twisted with possessive fury. Sam reaches toward his master with desperate love, trying to bridge the gap that power has opened between them. Gollum advances with predatory hunger, his hands extended like claws toward the thing he has sought for decades, and Boromir stands between them all, dying by degrees, but still present, still capable of choice, still faced with the decision that will define not just his own fate, but the fate of their entire world. The ring calls to him again, its voice stronger now in this place where its power runs deepest. Look at them, fighting like animals over something they cannot hope to control. You could end this. You could take the ring and use it as it was meant to be used, by someone with the strength and wisdom to wield it properly. You could save them all from their own weakness. But Boromir has learned to recognize the ring's voice, learned to hear the poison in its promises, and more importantly, he has learned something about the nature of strength itself. True strength is not the power to control others, but the power to control yourself. Not the ability to take what you want, but the ability to choose what you need. "Sam," he says, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of someone accustomed to command in desperate circumstances. "The ring cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with. If we are to save Frodo, we must save him from the thing he carries." Understanding passes between them without need for further explanation. They have come too far, sacrificed too much, lost too much to let their mission fail because one small hobbit's courage finally broke under impossible pressure. The ring must be destroyed, even if that means destroying the one who carries it, even if that means choosing the mission over the person they have sworn to protect. The battle that follows will determine everything: the fate of the ring, the future of Middle-earth, and the final measure of Boromir's redemption. 4 figures locked in desperate struggle above the fires where the world's corruption was first forged, each driven by purposes that seem just and necessary from their own perspective. But only one of those purposes serves something larger than itself. Only one chooses sacrifice over dominion, destruction over control, the ending of power rather than its claiming. And somewhere in the mathematics of that choice, in the simple decision to help rather than take, to protect rather than possess, lies the difference between salvation and catastrophe. The difference between a mission completed and a world lost to the very evil they sought to destroy. That difference hangs in the balance now, measured in heartbeats and choices and the willingness to pay prices that no one should have to pay, but which someone must be willing to pay nonetheless, because that is what it means to stand against the darkness when it rises. That is what it means to be worthy of the light you seek to protect. The fire roars below them, patient and eternal, waiting to receive either the ring's destruction or the ashes of those who failed to complete what they began in the Greenland so far away. And in that waiting, in that moment, balanced on the edge between triumph and disaster, everything depends on whether love proves stronger than power, whether sacrifice proves wiser than dominion, whether ordinary people can find the strength to choose correctly when the fate of everything hangs in the balance. The answer to those questions waits in the struggle that begins now, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, where heroes are made not through strength or wisdom, but through the simple willingness to do what is right regardless of the cost, even when that cost includes everything you have left to give. What happens next unfolds with the terrible clarity of inevitability, each moment crystallizing into perfect focus, as if time itself slows to witness the convergence of choice and consequence that will determine the fate of ages. The four figures locked in struggle above the fires of Mount Doom move with desperate purpose, each driven by needs so fundamental that compromise becomes impossible. Gollum reaches Frodo first, his pale hands closing around the ring with the frantic possessiveness of someone reclaiming a piece of his own soul. The impact sends both hobbit and creature tumbling toward the narrow bridge's edge, while Sam lunges forward with a cry of anguish that echoes off the chamber's scorched walls. But it's Boromir who acts with the decisive clarity that marks the difference between good intentions and effective intervention. The dying captain of Gondor throws himself between Gollum and the precipice, his failing strength focused into one final, perfect moment of protective instinct. His arms close around the creature's pale form just as Gollum tears the ring from Frodo's grasp, and for a heartbeat that seems to stretch into eternity, the three of them stand locked together on the bridge's crumbling edge. Gollum shrieks with triumph as the ring settles onto his finger, his voice rising to harmonize with the mountain's rumbling, as if Mount Doom itself recognizes the return of its master's most prized creation. But his celebration transforms into terror as he realizes that Boromir's grip will not release, that the man who has spent his final weeks learning to resist the ring's temptation has found a way to ensure its destruction, even at the cost of his own life. "No!" Gollum screams, his free hand clawing at Boromir's face as he struggles to break free. "Let us go, nasty tall man. We has our precious, we has what belongs to us." But Boromir's response comes not in words, but in action. Using the last of his poisoned strength, he shifts his weight and tumbles backward, carrying Gollum with him toward the fires that have waited 3,000 years to reclaim what was forged in their depths. As they fall, the ring's golden fire flares one final time, its malevolent light washing over the chamber in waves that speak of power beyond mortal comprehension, being snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. The voice that has whispered temptation into the hearts of kings and heroes and ordinary folk alike rises to a shriek of denial that cracks the mountain's stone and sends avalanches cascading down its outer slopes. Then both voice and light die together in the molten rock below, taking with them the creature who sought the ring above all else and the man who found his salvation in letting it go. Frodo collapses at the bridge's edge, his hand reaching toward the place where his protector disappeared into the fires, while Sam gathers him close with the fierce protectiveness of someone who has lost too much and will not lose more. The ring's destruction releases them both from burdens they have carried across half the world. But the price of that freedom lies cooling in the lava below, measured in the life of someone who chose duty over desire when the choice mattered most. "He saved us all," Sam whispers, his voice barely audible over Mount Doom's agonized rumbling as Sauron's power unravels and the mountain begins its long collapse. In the end, when everything hung in the balance, he saved us all. The rescue that follows comes with the swift efficiency of providential timing. Great eagles swooping down through the smoke and ash to bear the ring-bearer and his companion away from the mountain's death throes. As they rise above the devastation, Frodo looks back one final time toward the fires that have claimed both the ring and the man who died to ensure its destruction. What he sees there will haunt his dreams for the remainder of his days. Not the image of failure or defeat, but the knowledge that heroism sometimes requires the ultimate price, and that some people are willing to pay it when the need is great enough. The news of Boromir's sacrifice spreads across Middle-earth with the speed of eagle's wings and the authority of deeds that reshape the world. In Minas Tirith, where Denethor has been pulled back from madness by his younger son's steady counsel, the announcement comes with the weight of vindication and grief intertwined. The steward who once doubted his elder son's wisdom weeps for the man who proved himself worthy of every lesson about duty and sacrifice ever taught in the halls of the Númenóreans. Faramir receives the news in the houses of healing, where he recovers from wounds sustained in Osgiliath's final defense, and his first response is not grief, but pride. His brother chose correctly when the choice mattered most, chose the larger duty over the smaller one, chose the salvation of the world over the preservation of himself. He was always the better man, Faramir tells Aragorn, when the newly crowned king comes to pay his respects to the family of the hero who made his reign possible. I just never understood what made him better until now. What made him better, Aragorn replies, was the same thing that made him briefly worse. He loved too much to accept easy answers, cared too deeply to trust in partial solutions. The ring could tempt him precisely because he wanted so desperately to save everyone he'd sworn to protect. And in the end, he did save them. All of them. Us. The funeral that follows becomes less a mourning than a celebration, though the grief remains real and sharp for those who knew Boromir as more than symbol or legend. His empty tomb in the houses of the dead receives honors typically reserved for kings, while his horn, recovered from the aftermath of Mount Doom's collapse, sounds one final time across the Pelennor fields as a tribute to the man who learned that the greatest battles are sometimes fought against the darkness within. But perhaps the most fitting memorial comes not in stone or ceremony, but in the stories that spread through the rebuilt cities and replanted fields of the age that follows. Children in the Shire hear tales of the captain who conquered himself, who faced the ring's ultimate temptation and chose service over dominion. Soldiers in Gondor's restored garrisons learn of the heir who gave up his inheritance to ensure that inheritance would continue to exist. Mothers in Rohan speak to their daughters of the man who showed that true strength lies not in taking what you want, but in protecting what others need. The statues come later, commissioned by craftsmen who never knew Boromir, but understand the importance of preserving examples for future generations to emulate. They show him not in the moment of his death, but in the moment of his choice. Standing beside the falls of Rauros, with his hand pulled back from temptation, his face showing the struggle between desire and duty that every person faces in their own way. The inscription beneath reads simply, "In honor of those who choose correctly, when choosing correctly costs everything they have to give." Sam returns to the Shire, carrying more than memories of gardens glimpsed in elvish lands, or kings met on the road to Mount Doom. He carries the knowledge that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they find the courage to serve purposes larger than themselves. The story he tells in The Green Dragon on quiet evenings speaks of a man who learned that heroism is not about being unafraid, but about being afraid and choosing to do what's right anyway. Captain Boromir, he was called, Sam says to anyone willing to listen. And he earned that title not through the commanding of others, but through the commanding of himself. There at the end, when the ring offered him everything he'd ever wanted, he chose instead to give everything he'd ever been. That's what makes a man worth following. That's what makes a life worth living. Frodo himself speaks less of those final moments, the weight of what he witnessed too complex for easy sharing. But on the anniversary of the ring's destruction, he climbs the hill above Hobbiton and looks eastward toward the lands where a man died so that the world might live. The gratitude he feels carries no burden of debt. Boromir sought no reward for his sacrifice, but rather the simple acknowledgement that some gifts can never be repaid, only honored through the choices made by those who survive to remember them. Years pass, and the Fourth Age unfolds with the promise and peril that mark all new beginnings. Gondor rebuilds under Faramir's stewardship, its white stones reflecting sunlight that has not shone so clearly since the shadow first fell across the east. The Shire prospers under the gentle protection of rangers who understand that some things are worth defending precisely because they cannot defend themselves. And in the deepest archives of Minas Tirith, scholars preserve Boromir's tactical notes and strategic observations, treasuring them not just for their military value, but as evidence of a mind that served wisdom even while struggling with temptation. But perhaps the truest monument to Boromir's legacy lies not in any physical memorial, but in the choices made by those who come after, who face their own moments of temptation and remember that someone before them chose correctly when choice seemed impossible. Teachers in schools that wouldn't exist without his sacrifice explain to their students that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear. Leaders in councils that meet under banners, his death made possible discover that strength is measured not by the power to command others, but by the ability to command oneself. And sometimes, in the quiet hours when the weight of responsibility grows heavy and easy answers whisper their seductive promises, they remember the captain of Gondor, who learned that the hardest battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the darkness that lives in every heart. They remember that he won his most important victory not through sword or strength, but through the simple decision to say no when saying yes would have given him everything he thought he wanted. That memory, carried forward by people who never knew his name, but benefit from his choice, becomes the foundation upon which the new age builds its hopes. Not the promise that heroes will always emerge to save the day, but the knowledge that ordinary people can become heroes when they choose to serve something larger than themselves. That knowledge, tested in the fires of Mount Doom and proven in the choice of one man to die, rather than betray his own redemption, carries Middle-earth forward into whatever ages yet to come. And in that carrying forward, in that preservation of hope purchased with the highest price, Boromir's horn sounds one final note across the turning of the world. A note of triumph, a note of completion, a note that speaks of prices paid gladly and duties fulfilled against all odds. The note of a man who found his way home, not by returning to the place he came from, but by becoming the person he was always meant to be, even when that becoming required everything he had to give.